So it's a real pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me in the back? Am I going to need a microphone? I'm okay. Okay, great. So this is a fun story, especially for the Detroit metropolitan area, and I think you'll see it. But what comes to mind when you think of metropolitan Detroit? Help me out. Greektown, the Riverwalk. Roads, concrete. Tigers. How about the Lions? We got here the river. Yeah. Yeah, it's known for a lot of things. You know, obviously automobiles is in there. The Tigers is on the screen there, but art and music, Motown, techno, and of course, downtown Detroit as well. But historically, most people would not have thought about Metro Detroit as a place for outdoor recreation, right? We were the automobile capital of the United States, right? We were we still are the automobile capital of the United States. We were the arsenal of democracy. It has working rivers that supported industry and commerce. This metropolitan Detroit, if you think about the water end of things, starting with the St. Clair River, Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, and Western Lake Erie, we had the St. Clair River was a pollution hotspot identified by the International Joint Commission under the Boundary Waters Treaty. So was the Clinton River on Lake St. Clair, the Detroit River, the Rouge River, and the River Raisin in Monroe. So we not only have our share, but we have more than our share of historical environmental problems. But for over 100 years, our Detroit River was perceived as a working river that supported commerce and industry. That's the Uniroyal site, if some of you want to know. And pollution was just part of the cost of doing business. So the picture on the left-hand side of your screen is the old McLeod Steel site in Riverview and Trenton. And, they always said, where does the oil come from? Well, there's lots of photos historically that show that kind of stuff. The picture on the right is U.S. Steel in Ecorse, and that's pickle liquor coming in to the river from that. Both photos are from the 1960s. And this is the picture of the confluence of the Rouge River on the left-hand side of the photo and the Detroit River there. And you can see the brown, I'll just tell you, is raw sewage. And you see some streaks of black there, black to gray, that's oil. Then you see a conical shaped plume there. That's the submerged discharge pipe of the Detroit wastewater treatment plant, one of the largest ones in North America. So in the 1960s, the Federal Water Pollution Control Administration, that was sort of the predecessor of U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, identified Detroit River as one of the most polluted rivers in the United States. Oil was dumped into the river. They used to say discharged, but it was more accurate to say dumped into the river in very large quantities. In 1960, 12,000 ducks and geese died from oil pollution. Think about winters back then were very cold, right? There was very few spots on the river that wouldn't freeze, right? There would be few open pockets of water, and in there was oil. And on these waterfowl migrations, the ducks and geese would come down, land in these pockets of open water. Oil was in there, and they would die. So 12,000 ducks and geese died in 1960, another 5,400 in 1967. This is an archival photo of a conservation officer from the 1960s with some dead ducks in it. Then adding insult to injury, on October 9th, 1969, the Rouge River caught on fire. Like, water doesn't ignite, it doesn't catch on fire. It was the oil floating on the surface and oil-soaked wooden debris that caught on fire. A worker dropped an acetylene torch, caught this oil and oil-soaked wooden debris on fire, and then it took 10 pieces of fire department equipment and the John Kendall that you see right here, the fireboat at the time, to try to contain that fire and allow it to burn itself out. That's what you do. This was on the Rouge River. You can see the Ford Motor Company stack. You can see the drawbridge. So you've got some kind of place markers there for it. A couple of days later, the Detroit Free Press said, when you have a river that burns, for crying out loud, you have troubles. It happened on Cleveland's Cuyahoga, and now it has happened on the Rouge River. Well, how many of you have heard that the Cuyahoga River burned? Most of you. How many of you knew the Rouge River burned? A few, less. So why did the Cuyahoga River get so much more attention than the Rouge River? The answer to that is that back in the 1960s, in 69, Time magazine decided to have a new section of their magazine, and it was going to be called the Environment section. And the first issue, the leading story, was the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. That issue happened to be the most well-read issue of Time up until that point. Think about it, 1969, Apollo coming back from the moon, that issue. The Chappaquiddick accident for the Kennedys out east. So that made it that story catapulted across the world, and the Cuyahoga fire is perceived as one of the catalysts for the Clean Water Act. The year later, this is an archival photo out of the Reuther Library at Wayne State University. You can see the Detroit skyline in the background, the boat, the nice boat in the foreground with the U.S. flag is the UAW, the United Auto Workers. The boat next to it with the Canadian flag you can see up there is the CAW, the Canadian Auto Workers. So auto workers worked sometimes 6 and even more days in the factory, long hours. When they came out, they didn't want to go and sit in front of a TV and watch sports or television programs. They wanted to be outside. So they were on the forefront of conservation clubs starting in the 40s and 50s. And so, and then they, with all this pollution, they were concerned about their workers and exposure to this pollution. So they became some of the first advocates for clean air, for clean water. And this is an archival photo from April 22nd, 1970, the first Earth Day, the very first Earth Day. And you see the wreath in the lower left-hand corner there. They're holding a wake on the river, symbolizing the death of the Detroit River. They were the early advocates for clean water and everything else. Public outcry over pollution. Think of what happened back then, the Santa Barbara oil spill on the West Coast and the Cuyahoga, and people started to speak out about pollution, and that resulted in NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970. NEPA is like the Magna Carta of environmental laws. More countries throughout the world have modeled their environmental laws after NEPA than any other piece of legislation. 1970, the Canada Water Act. 1972, the U.S. Clean Water Act. 72, also, Canada, U.S. came in and said, we have 1/5 the standing fresh water on the Earth's surface. We need to do a better job of protecting it. And they signed the Canada-U.S. Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that's heralded as a model throughout the world. And then 1973, the Endangered Species Act. What an amazing set of accomplishments, because people cared about the outdoors and were willing to speak out and pass it on as a gift to future generations. As a result of that, we saw some improvements. I'm just going to catalog some of the improvements that we've seen from that era, late 60s, early 70s. We've seen substantial reductions in oil discharges and spills and winter duck kills due to oil pollution have been eliminated. We've spent billions of dollars with a B, billions of dollars have been spent on upgrading wastewater treatment plants from primary treatment to secondary treatment with phosphorus removal. We've seen a 90% decline in phosphorus concentration and loading from that, one of the largest plants in the United States, the Detroit wastewater treatment plant on the banks of the Detroit River. Since 1960, there's been over a 90% reduction in untreated combined sewer overflow volume. Old cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Detroit, Buffalo, Toronto have combined storm and sanitary sewers. So everything works fine when it's not raining. The sewage goes to the sewage treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant gets treated and then gets discharged to a receiving water body. But when it rains, it exceeds the carrying capacity of this combined storm and sanitary sewer system. And they have these points, these flap gates that open up, and raw sewage and stormwater come into a receiving water body. So we've seen, good news, a 90% reduction in untreated combined sewer overflow volume in Southeast Michigan. Between the 60s and 80s, there was a 4,000 metric ton per day decrease in chloride loadings to Detroit River. That's because chemical plants started realizing they were throwing things away that they could reuse. So they recovered, recycled, did pollution prevention. There's been an 80% decline in mercury in walleye, yet health advisories remain in effect for certain species and certain size classes, an 88% decline in DDE, which is the breakdown product of that pesticide DDT, and a 90% decline in PCBs in herring gull eggs from Fighting Island, right in the middle of the Detroit River. Systematic monitoring over 4 decades. And we've cleaned up some contaminated sediments, about 300,000 cubic meters of contaminated sediment in Detroit River and about 400,000 in the Rouge River. This happens to be the Black Lagoon and the sediment remediation there. And they were, all that oil and everything was accumulated because water velocities would slow down in this backwater, and it was an eddy. And so sediments in there were loaded with not only oil and petroleum products, but heavy metals and mercury and PCBs. And so when they started removing it, they had to have a double silt screen curtain, not to spread it and make the problem worse, and remove everything and dispose of it upland. So these environmental improvements are heartening, but that's not what I want you to remember. This is the favorite part of my job right now, and that is the ecological recovery of this system. So think about it. For 25 years, bald eagles in metropolitan Detroit tried to nest and couldn't produce any viable young. Eggshell thinning because of things like DDT, dieldrin, toxaphene. And so they have come back. We banned DDT. We strictly limited PCBs, a number of things. But you can see they came back, and now we have 25 active nests in this area. What an amazing recovery. Same story with peregrine falcons. Those organochlorine pesticides were causing eggshell thinning, and no peregrine falcons were nesting and producing young in Southeast Michigan. So back in 1987, they brought in peregrine falcons and built hacking boxes on the skyscrapers way at the top up there and nesting habitat for them. And they came, it took them a while to get acclimated to the area, but you can see the slow progression there. And now they are 20 or more young are fledged. That means leaving the nest each year. Many of them in downtown Detroit, which is really an amazing story. I put the Ambassador Bridge photo in there because they are nesting on the Ambassador Bridge as well right now, which is very cool. And they have all these people with spotting scopes on the Windsor side, and they track when is the first bird going to fledge the nest, what are the names of the young. It's like a contest. It's really fun. Same story for osprey. By 1999, there was only one active nest in southeast Michigan. Reintroduction of osprey happened in the 80s, and we have now 50 or more active nests of osprey in our area. And I'm sure you see them close to water on many of the trails. They are really coming back. Lake sturgeon. We did everything humanly possible to degrade the sturgeon population. You know, sturgeon are lithophilic spawners. So litho is rock, philic is loving. Rock-loving spawners. They spawn on rocks in the bottom of the river. So when we built the shipping channels and dredged down 23 feet, those were the rapids. That's where these fish spawned. And then the wetlands are their nursery habitat. So we have a 97% loss of coastal wetlands on the Detroit River. That was their nursery habitat. Adding insult to injury, during the steamer days, they would harvest these sturgeon. Now, these are sturgeon 6 feet long and 150 to 200 pounds. Put them on the docks of the Detroit River, dry them out, and burn them in the boilers of steamers plying the Great Lakes. Do you believe that? And so, obviously, and then so during the 60s and 70s, we had fishery biologists on the river, and they were looking for spawning, but no spawning. And then the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then in 2001, in the most unbelievable place, in a coal cinder pile off of Zug Island. How many of you know Zug Island? It's kind of the heart of the Industrial Revolution. So coal cinders on the bottom, they spawned on it, and it was successful. They were producing young. First time in over 30 years. And since then, we have built 10 lithophilic spawning reefs in the river. And I can tell you more about that in some questions. Same thing, Lake Whitefish is a rock-loving spawner. And so they were gone. They are now back for the first time since 1916, spawning in the river, and literally tens of millions of fry are going out into Lake Erie now as a result of that. Walleye in the 1970s were in a crisis state as defined by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. They said, we've got to do something. We're gonna really destroy the population. So they worked between Canada and the United States, and the walleye are back. And now the Detroit River and Western Lake Erie, or all of Lake Erie, are called the walleye capital of the world. More walleye are caught in that area than any other place. Literally 10 million walleye from Lake Erie ascend the Detroit River, come up the Detroit River to spawn in there, creating a fishing frenzy. And you can see literally hundreds of boats off Elizabeth Park. This happens to be a 14.2 pound walleye, a pretty prized catch in one of the tournaments on the Detroit River. And then beaver. Think about this. We first extirpated. Extirpated means locally extinct. So during the fur trade era, many, many hundred years ago, 1600s, 1700s, we literally hunted and trapped them to local extinction. Then during the Industrial Revolution, there was so much oil in the river that they couldn't have survived in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and 70s because oil would mat their fur. They couldn't thermal regulate and keep warm, and they would die. So in 2008, because of this cleanup, our best guess is that a couple of adventurous beaver came up from the Canadian side of Lake St. Clair, swam down the Canadian shoreline, went over and visited an island called Peche Isle at the head of the Detroit River. Didn't really like what they found out there. Went over to Belle Isle. Didn't have quite the habitat they wanted. And they went to the Connor Creek power plant. And they went there, and there was big, tall fences and barbed wire, so there were no predators in there. And they built a lodge, had a couple pups, and now beaver are widely seen on the river, including at Belle Isle and Grosse Seal. And this is an actual photo from the Connor Creek power plant of the beaver. And this is my all-time favorite photo. This is the Detroit River Walk. And one of my friends one day was doing an educational program on the River Walk, and what the heck is walking up the River Walk? And it was a beaver, and it would just casually walk by. So she had the wherewithal to take out her smartphone, video record it, put it to music, and that went viral across the world. And this is a picture from that, and that's the carousel on the River Walk. How fun is that? Then a few years later, a student at the University of Windsor, actually a biology student who was working on his PhD, and he spent long hours, 10 hours a day in the laboratory, and his kind of practice was to get up in the morning and go for a walk along the river to kind of start his day out right, and he knew he would be in the lab a long time. And so he sees a head pop out of the water, and he goes, oh, it's probably a beaver, right? It's got to be a beaver. And it's kind of too big to be a muskrat. And so then it porpoises, and he doesn't see the flat, big tail, right? A long, narrow tail. And he goes, oh my goodness. He knew it was an otter. So he went out to the end of a pier right at the Ambassador Bridge. Some of you may know it. There's a nice pier that goes out there. Took his camera out, did a video, took 50 pictures of it, and it went viral. First time in 100 years that we had river otter in the Detroit River. So if you add that up, the return of bald eagles, peregrine falcons, osprey, lake sturgeon, lake whitefish, walleye, beaver, otter, it's one of the single most remarkable ecological recovery stories in North America. And that's because how polluted our river was. So, as you know, you all know this, these waters inspire a sense of wonder. These waters are where we make memories with our families and friends. These waters and outdoor recreation can lead to a stewardship ethic. The more people are connected to these waters, the greater chance that they will care for it. And then outdoor recreation can improve human health, improve quality of life, and grow an outdoor recreational economy. Just a couple of examples of what has come out of this cleanup and ecological restoration. Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, established in 2001. The only one in North America, and only a small handful at the time were called urban refuges, and like, where is the next generation of conservationists going to come from? It's probably not going to be rural areas. It's going to be more because so many people live, 64% of the world's population lives in urban areas, and 80% of all US citizens and Canadians live in urban areas. So they created this refuge, amazing thing. It's got a big polygon, it goes from southwest Detroit down to the Michigan-Ohio border, and on the Canadian side, it extends all the way out to include Point Pelee National Park. You see the peninsula there, Pelee Island, and so that's what it sort of looks like. Right now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has about 6,200 acres of lands in there that they manage. The Michigan DNR has about nearly 7,900 acres of lands. And then the Canadian Registry of Lands has places like Ojibwe Park on it, and they have about 4,000 acres. So about 18,900 acres are devoted to conservation and outdoor recreation. And the goal is 20,000 in the next 10 years. The cornerstone of that was something called Humbug Marsh. That'd be a good small hike for a day, but this is the last mile of natural shoreline on the U.S. mainland of the Detroit River. A little over 20 years ago, a developer came in and said, oh my gosh, look at that land. We could put a subdivision there. We could build a bridge to that island and put McMansions on that island. We could put a marina in the marsh there. We could dredge it out and put a marina. We could put homes, a golf course, a riding stable, even a strip mall, another strip mall like we need one. So to do that project, they were going to destroy some wetlands. And so there was a conservation easement placed on this land. And so they had to hold a public hearing that would get feedback on it. And it was held in Gibraltar Carlson High School. So many people came that the fire marshal shut the doors on the gymnasium. The state police shut down the Gibraltar Road exit on I-75 and said, if you're going to that public hearing, turn around and go home. You'll never get into the gymnasium. The vast majority of those people spoke out in protecting the last mile of natural shoreline on the U.S. mainland of the Detroit River. Another picture of it, what it looks like. The piece of property, like sort of trapezoidal shaped on the right-hand side, is an old Chrysler manufacturing facility. It was the closest place to Humbug Island there, You can see that island there. And so that's where the bridge would go. So the thinking was back then, let's take that off. Let's take that off the market so that they can't get easy access to the island. And but with that, oh my gosh, this is what it looked like before. They made automotive brakes and paints and solvents there for 44 years. Tore down the buildings, put big fences around it, barbed wire around it, and it sat vacant in the previous picture. Looks just like that for 10 more years until we came along. But if we were to take that off the market and buy it from Chrysler, we would have some responsibility for cleaning it up. Not just the human health standards, which are about here, wildlife standards are even higher. So we took the leap of faith with help of somebody called John Dingell, who was the Dean of Congress at that time, and we cleaned it up. And today sits a Gold LEED certified visitor center, 3 miles of trails. You see the fishing pier going out 650 feet into the river, where people who don't own a boat can get a trophy walleye from that pier. The school ship from Inland Seas Education Program lands there and takes kids out on the river and lake and uses it as a living laboratory. It is an amazing place today. Another story is downtown Detroit. Detroit, like many cities, made the river its back door. Some of you remember the Renaissance Center faced inland and away from the Detroit River, right? Some of the old other businesses faced inland and away from it. There were 3 sets, lower right-hand corner, 3 sets of cement silos on the river. There were dilapidated and abandoned buildings. There were material storage piles and surface parking lots. That's what our river front was like. And in 2003, they created the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy to turn this into a world-class gathering place, a new waterfront porch for people from metropolitan Detroit and visitors throughout the world. I hope many of you have been there, but it's just an amazing thing to see. And what it has done for Detroit is truly amazing. The Riverfront Conservancy its vision was transform Detroit's international riverfront, the face of the city, into a beautiful, exciting, safe, accessible, world-class gathering place for all. Not only all people, all backgrounds, but all wildlife as well. And so it's about 6 miles long. It's about 80% done. The next big segment will open next year, called Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park. It already has more than 3 million annual visitors to it. After the first 10 years, we did an economic benefits study. And that showed that at that time, about $140 million was raised and invested to build the first phases of the Detroit Riverwalk. That $140 million was raised during the time where the city of Detroit went bankrupt. It was the largest city in the United States to ever go through bankruptcy, and they raised those kinds of funds. The return on that investment was $1 billion of additional development on the waterfront. And what a story that is. And of course, it's the 3 years in a row, was voted the #1 Riverwalk in the United States by USA Today. And then linking to that is the Joe Louis Greenway that loops around the city and connects to the north. We're catching up to other places, which is really good. And now there's this unified Greenway partnership to complete these. And they've raised $229 million in federal, state, local, and philanthropic funds towards a goal of about $350 million. An early funder of that was the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. In 2001, they polled the communities of Southeast Michigan, and they said, what's stopping you from building trails? What's stopping you from building greenways or water trails, blueways? And the consistent answer was, we don't have the money. We don't have the discretionary money. You don't realize that money is tight and recreation ranks low on the priority scale. So Community Foundation said, what would happen if we removed that obstacle? And they said, well, what do you mean? What happens if we go out and raise money that you can use to make match on that? So they created a fund, $25 million in 1 year, to make match on local trail projects. That grew to $33 million over time and leveraged another $125 million to design, finance, and build 100 miles of trails in Southeast Michigan. As that was sort of winding down, that $33 million, Community Foundation said, what's next? You've got to have something else. So they talked to a lot of people and they came up with this idea. Let's create the Great Lakes Way. The Great Lakes Way is an interconnected set of 156 miles of water trails along St. Clair River, Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, Western Lake Erie, going up into the tributaries like the Clinton River Water Trail, the Lower Rouge River Water Trail, the Huron River Water Trail, and 160 miles of greenways stretching from Port Huron on southern Lake Huron all the way down to Toledo, Ohio. And the vision that they came up with through a multi-stakeholder process was all residents and visitors of Southeast Michigan are connected to and benefit from world-class fresh water, wildlife, recreation, and heritage right in our backyard. So this is what the vision map looked like, On the left-hand side of your screen, the blue is the blueways or water trails, are the water trails. And the green are the greenways. And so there's a really neat place, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SUMCOG, has an interactive map of this out there, and there's a website, and I can share that with you later. But it also shows points of interest. What are the cool points of interest? Like conservation lands or big parks or historical attractions up and down the corridor. Along this Great Lakes Way, from Port Huron to Toledo, you'll find two wetlands of international importance. One of the largest freshwater deltas in the world, the St. Clair Flats. 4 important bird areas designated by National Audubon Society. The only international heritage river system in the world, the Detroit River. The only international wildlife refuge in North America, the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge. One of the 3 best places to watch hawk migrations in the United States. Lake Erie Metro Park and right across the river in Ontario. One of the top 10 metropolitan areas for waterfowl hunting in the United States, as defined by Ducks Unlimited. An internationally renowned fishery that attracts tournaments offering $500 to $1.5 million of prize money, and a regional shorebird reserve designated under the Western Hemispheric Shorebird Reserve Network, and finally, many historical attractions, including the Underground Railroad, Native Americans, shipbuilding, historic Fort Wayne, River Raisin National Battlefield Park, unique Motor Cities National Heritage Area sites, and many more. The good news, the water trails are in place. You know, along the St. Clair River, along Lake St. Clair, along the Detroit River and Western Lake Erie, and even up into the tributaries as well. There's going to be more landings and launchings for kayaking in the future, but it's usable now. And this greenways portion of it is 65% is usable right now. During this time, the first inkling of a new bridge between the United States and Canada came up. And there was the first discussions. And they said, well, Canada is going to come in and fund this bridge. And they're going to, you know, set up a crown corporation in legal terms of Canada to oversee it and build something called the Gordie Howe International Bridge. So they invited a whole bunch of us who love the outdoors to come to the table. And they said, well, what is your advice for us? And they kept all the US stakeholders separate from the Canadian stakeholders. We didn't like that because we, just like all of us, you know, we all love what we want to do, we'll be outdoors. So we said, okay, if you're going to do that, in parallel to what you're doing, we're going to set up our own committee that involves almost the same people to speak in one voice to you about what we think needs to happen. So we called that a vision map, and it called for 3 things. It called for improvements to the tunnel bus system, to put bicycle racks on it, so you could take your bike across one way or the other and then explore. The second one, give us a dedicated bicycle lane on the Gordie Howe International Bridge. They said that's a tall order. And then the third one is, you know, one time before there was a tunnel, before there was a Ambassador Bridge, there were 100 ferries crossing the river each day to move people and goods and everything else. So reinstate a ferry system where you could put a bicycle on it, cross the river, and enjoy it. So we stand today with 2 of those. We have improvements to the tunnel bus system for the Windsor-Detroit tunnel bus, and we have a commitment to a dedicated, lower right-hand corner, multi-use trail separated from the traffic on the Gordie Howe Bridge. And guess what? It opens in 2025. Isn't that something? That is amazing. It's going to open, and if you are a pedestrian or a bicyclist, there will be no toll. The tolls are going to be for cars and trucks, but not for us, you know, which is pretty cool. So when you land in Canada, which is kind of West Windsor, if you know the directions there, you will be landing where the old Ojibwe Park was. Ojibwe Park was a city park there, and there were a number of different parcels owned by the provincial government, some by Essex Region Conservation Authority, some by private landowners, and one was even on the market, Ojibwe Shores. So the federal government did an experiment right before this, and they said, we need to have a national urban park, and let's experiment with it. We need to bring conservation to cities. We need to make nature part of everyday urban life. So they created Rouge National Urban Park in Toronto. It was so successful. It's been so well received. The next one will be Ojibwe National Urban Park at the foot of the Gordie Howe Bridge. It's going to be an amazing experience. Tall grass prairie, you know, 12, 14 feet tall, native grasses, and just amazing. And the birding is exceptional. It's got its visitor center in place. But on the US side, in close proximity to that is what I'd mentioned earlier, Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park. Ralph Wilson was the owner of the Buffalo Bills. Some of you may know the football. The Lions fans may know that historically. So Ralph Wilson was somebody who had many businesses throughout the United States, and he was incredibly wealthy. So towards the end of his life, he updated his will, and he said, when I pass away, it is my wish that you will take the proceeds from selling the Buffalo Bills, put it into a foundation named after me, and give that money away in 15 years so that people who knew me or knew of me could benefit from me, you know, my philanthropy. So they sell it. They make $1.1 billion in selling that. They create the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, headquartered in downtown Detroit. He lived in Detroit, by the way, over in the Point, sort of just on the edge of Detroit. He had lots of businesses in Buffalo, including the Buffalo Bills, so those two. So the first gift out of that money was $50 million to Buffalo to build the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park, named after him, and an additional $50 million to have trails, greenway trails, connect to that park. Sorry about that. Am I okay? The second one, same park, same name, on the banks of the Detroit River, in close proximity. I mean, this is in the shadow of the Ambassador Bridge, and just a little bit, if you think about it, a little bit west is the Gordie Howe International Bridge. This is going to be amazing. These were brownfields. There was nothing there. And they've got a water garden and ponds. They're going to have an amphitheater, a sports house, 300 native gene pool trees are being planted right now. This is going to be something really cool. And this is at the foot of the Southwest Greenway. Southwest Greenway goes from Central Train Station, you know, the Ford mobility hub, down to Ralph Wilson Park, and then that'll go up to Mexican Town and everything else. Reconnecting people. This opens in the fall of 25. Can you imagine it? Same time as the bridge. And then Ojibwe is already, what an experience, what an opportunity for us to engage kids in the inner city with the outdoors. So, okay, what an opportunity this presented to ourselves. And we said, we need to get our act together. How do we strategically promote cross-border trail tourism? Okay, how do we do that? So we went up and visited the folks from the Waterfront Regeneration Trust in Toronto. They've been around for more than 30 years. They build the golden horseshoe of trails, going from the east side of Toronto all the way down to Burlington and Buffalo, Niagara Falls, you know, kind of area. Then that expanded out into the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail, all the Great Lakes on the Canadian side. The other one is the Trans-Canada Trail, the longest trail in the world. Our partner, the Iron Bell Trail, going from Ironwood, Michigan, in the UP, across the UP, down to Belle Isle. So Iron Bell Trail, Ironwood to Belle Isle. And we got it. We are going to work on these unique cross-border experiences that we can provide and strategically give. This is a map of the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail to show you just the geography of it, which is amazing. Here's the longest trail in the world, the Trans-Canada Trail. And just in the last 9 months, the Gordie Howe International Bridge became a signatory as part of the Trans-Canada Trail. And of course, we're going to be linked to it. And here's a map of the Iron Bell Trail, and all coming together at the Gordie Howe International Bridge. So think of the experiences that we can offer that no one else can offer. We can offer stuff like open streets, like Windsor does an open streets, where they close the streets in downtown Windsor, some of them, to vehicular traffic, and they make it only pedestrian. And so an open street. So we could have a joint open streets event between the two sides. The Underground Railroad folks have been working on this for a decade already, and they're going after, with lots of support from Canada and the United States, a UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. And when you have one of those, that brings people, that brings a tourists to the area. Think of First Nations celebrations, that we could do. Things like World Migratory Bird Day and Earth Day celebrations, and conservation. You could spend the morning in Belle Isle and go to Ralph Wilson Park and go to Ojibwe and go visit some of the Essex Region conservation lands by bicycle, And then we could also do automobile history, rum running, and so much more. So one of the things they've learned is, day trips are important. A day trip. What can I do in a half a day or a full day? But now there's so many that want to know, where do I stay? Where's the Airbnb? Where's the B&B? And where do I eat? And everything else. So it is a really, really exciting time for our region. For the Great Lakes Way, when you're making the case for something and you're going to involve federal governments and the state government and communities up and down and counties and everything else, you need to make the case. And one of the best ways to do that is economic benefits. So the Great Lakes Way is a component of a growing Great Lakes blue economy. Blue economy means you're fostering sustainable use of the Great Lakes while creating economic growth, improving livelihoods, and preserving the health of these inland seas. So blue economy is kind of like a philosophy. Great example is this. So in 2022, the Community Foundation commissioned an economic benefit study, people from University of Michigan and elsewhere, to look at this. And after their work, it came back, the total economic impact of the elements of the Great Lakes Way is estimated to be approximately between $3.75 and $5 billion annually. Just recently, in the last month, the Great Lakes Way got a merit award from the Michigan chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And we just held a conference last month, October 22nd, the University of Windsor, and the whole theme of that conference was cross-border trail tourism. And there was over 200 people in attendance at that. And then we streamed it live, just like you're doing tonight, to Southwest Detroit, to Southwest Mexican Town Community Development Corporation, so they could participate as well. And the excitement is amazing. So it is something we are really having fun with. And thank you for letting me share this story with you tonight. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes, so they're building that multi-use trail across the bridge for pedestrians and bicyclists. And then on our side, it's going to be the Joe Louis Greenway. So you can imagine the bridge is over a $5 billion investment by the government of Canada, including this multi-use trail. And so that elevated the priority is when they get off the bridge, where do they go? So if you turn left, if you think about it, the United States, you're going to go west and you're going to be on downriver linked greenways. So there'll be signage going that way. There'll be a loop trail, that touches on historic Fort Wayne and hooks eventually into the Riverwalk. And so, yeah, all of that is underway. Will it all be open by the fall of 2025? Probably not, but it's going to be usable. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of attention being given to what is that first experience of a Canadian entering the United States and Southwest Detroit, and want that experience to be good. Same is true. The Gordie Howe International Bridge is a catalyst on the Windsor side to get their act together and create those linkages to link into the Chrysler Canada Trail and the other trails that will go along the waterfront in Windsor as well. So that's going. Yes, in the back, and then you.
Is there a way to incorporate the prevention of invasive species into the planning, whether a 5 or 10-year plan?
Invasive species?
Yeah.
Greenways, when the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan created the Greenways Initiative, they intentionally spelled it out, capital G, R-E-E-N, capital W-A-Y-S, Greenways. And that is, what an opportunity to create pollinator gardens, to do some riparian habitat, to tackle invasive species. So yes, it is implicit in there that we do that as we build these greenways. Let me give you an example of that. One of the worst areas, Southwest Detroit, right? And there's Marathon, the only refinery in Michigan. And you can imagine there's air pollution issues, there's brownfields issues, there's no habitat issues, So Marathon has been engaged for a number of years in going to local owners around there, creating like a buffer area around Marathon and offering fair market value and helping them move for their house. And then that area, the houses will be taken down. There'll be some who don't want to move, but it's going to become an urban park and conservation area. So grassland habitat, prairie habitat. It's going to be amazing. If you're interested, I can share something with you on that. If you look at the Riverwalk, every chance we get, we've created some butterfly habitat here. We've created the stormwater retention basin in Milliken State Park and softened the shoreline, tackled invasive species. So yeah, that is implicit in this work. Yes.
Yeah, you were talking about the first thing somebody coming from the inside is going to see Southwest Detroit.
Yeah.
What are they doing for ramping up restoration and other projects at Fort Wayne? That's the first site you're going to see.
Yeah. Fort Wayne. The good news for Fort Wayne, I worked on it for 10 years and didn't have much progress, okay? The good news is the city of Detroit owns historic Fort Wayne, and they now have signed an agreement with the National Park Service to co-manage and do certain things together. And so you all know the standards of National Park Service are really high, with all due respect to what Detroit's done, right? So that is some really good news. And so the more people you go by historic, it's a jewel, right? You look at Fort Malden in Amherstburg, across the river, and you head west and you go down to Amherstburg, and they've got a fort there. Amazing, amazing. Why can't we have that? We could do that, you know. So yeah, it's going to be, it just, again, it's like recreation. Historic Fort Wayne ranked so low on discretionary funding, and that's just never, and it's never had a champion. Who is the champion of historic Fort Wayne? You know, like when they did the River Walk, they had Matt Cullen from GM be the champion. When they did the International Wildlife Refuge, they had John Dingle. Who is the champion that's going to take that and open doors and make things happen and get it back to what we would all like it to be, you know? Other questions? Well, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.